Today's verses are Romans 2:14 through 16. And I'll be honest with you, they've been a bit difficult for me to record this particular episode. Not because the verses themselves per se are difficult. The ideas that they present are challenging for the world we're in today. And the verses go, when outsiders who have never heard of God's law follow it more or less by instinct, they confirm its truth by their obedience. They show that God's law is not something alien imposed on us from without, but woven within, woven into the very fabric of our creation. There is something deep within them that echoes God's yes and no, right and wrong. Their response to God's yes and no will become public knowledge on the day God makes his final decision about every man and woman. The message from God that I proclaim through Jesus Christ takes into account all these differences. And I guess the reason the verse has been difficult for me, because it's a verse of hope. That there is hope even for those who've never heard God's law, but understand who God is. It gives me hope that, it's strong arm morality. Not at all. It's the instinct. It's the nature of who we are. We're God's creation. So when we reflect that nature, that's a good thing. That's a positive. It gives me hope that there are more for us than against us. Not just heavenly hosts and spiritual beings and angels. Also people. People who know the difference between right and wrong and will act accordingly. It gives me hope. It gives me great hope that God is the one who sorts it out. Psalm 139, search me, O Lord, and know my soul. See if there be any hurtful way in me. The Lord knows us intimately. He knows the number of hairs on our head, the number of atoms in our body. Every day we have laid out before him. Like a beautiful choose your own adventure book that we get to go through as the person in the adventure. And that the message of Yeshua, Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Christ, that his love takes into account the whole of us. And he doesn't see the tax collector, he sees the soul. He doesn't see the murderer, he sees the person who believes in him. When he was dying at the cross on Calvary, the one who recognized him as Lord, today you will be with me in paradise. It gives me hope for relationship. It gives me hope for joy. And the reason it's difficult is because the disunity that I see is not acceptable. There's too much cutting down. And that's not okay. Telling somebody that because they don't walk the same way that they're evil, that's not okay. We're not the ones who determine that. There are behaviors and actions that are evil, absolutely. Absolutely. You don't dispute that. But a person's nature, a person's heart, that can't be known except by those who see the heart. And only God can see that. And those who he gives the wisdom and discernment to see it. But it all comes from God first. And so the difficulty for me wasn't necessarily a verse that gives me hope about everybody, out there who could know God even without knowing God, still being loved by their Abba, their Father. And that Jesus would take that into account. That gives me hope. The difficulty comes when we have tendencies to cut each other down. Judge not lest ye be judged. Then who has any right to say that, you're doing the walk wrong? There are behaviors that can be wrong. That's the one thing I love about how Paul sees it. As long as Jesus is being proclaimed and the relationship made open, that's the beauty. So as I read these verses, I pray for hope and unity. That those who may not know, following on instinct, give me hope. And that those who follow on instinct would be strengthened. Because we're not each other's enemies. We war against principalities and spirits, not flesh and blood. So, here is rejoicing that Christ Jesus takes into account all things, the whole person, and decides accordingly. And that gives me hope that God sees more than just what people see. And it makes me pray that we have eyes to see and ears to hear what God sees and hears, rather than what the world would say to see and hear. Tomorrow's verses are going to be 17 through 24, and they're part of what was giving me difficulty. Because it goes deeper into it, into relationship, deeper into the instinct of the heart, the nature of the person, and the better angels of our hearts. See you tomorrow for 17 through 24.